world leaders who control 85% of global GDP and two-thirds of the world's population defied U.S. President Donald Trump to join South Africa in adopting the Johannesburg Declaration at the just ended G20 Leaders Summit. These leaders, who included allies of the United States and personal friends of U.S. President Trump, sent a strong signal to the world that multilateralism can move on without the participation of the United States. This was a much needed and much deserved victory for South African President Cyril Ramaphosa as he brought to the end his tumultuous presidency of the G20. I will break all this down for you today. My name is Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I talk about geopolitics from the perspective of an African. So let's get right into it. I must start by acknowledging my South African brothers who showed me the right pronunciation of the name of their president. So in my YouTube comment, I saw at least 3 or 4 people pointing out to me the correct pronunciation of Ramaphosa. And I love that they did it in the spirit of Ubuntu, love, brotherliness, and friendship. Because I saw comments like, my continental friend, the right pronunciation of the name is this. This is my humble correction. I love us Africans. I love how we do things with politeness and love. Thank you. I'll pronounce it correctly from now on. And any other South African name I pronounce wrong, because I'm from West Africa, please feel free to correct me moving forward. As you've already started doing, Ramaphosa. I'll get it right. Anyway, let's get into some serious business. So the 2 days G20 Leaders Summit just ended in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it was a statement of victory, solidarity, and multilateralism, which was the agenda that South African President Ramaphosa went to the summit hoping to achieve, and he achieved it. It started with him making a declaration to the world that this is the first G20 Leaders Summit happening on the continent of Africa. And it is important that we show the world that multilateralism is still important to global, friendship, trade, and everything, right? When he made this declaration, it was at the beginning of the G20 Leaders Summit. And so usually the G20 leaders at the end of the summit, which is on day 2, make the declaration, if they make a declaration. But shortly after Ramaphosa made this call, world leaders responded to his call by making the declaration on day 1, which is a departure from tradition, also a big win for him. And here's the thing. So the G20 summit requires consensus to be able to make a declaration. And the consensus have to happen between leaders who are present at the summit, right? And so, which means that all the 19 countries who are present at the summit and the African Union and European Union have to accept the declaration before it will be adopted. You understand this? And so there was question of whether or not the declaration will be accepted because Argentina had declared that it wasn't going to accept the declaration, or it wasn't in consensus with the rest of the world. So here's the thing. It's just simple politics. U.S. President Donald Trump bailed out Argentina earlier this year by giving them $20 billion from the U.S. Exchange Stabilization Fund and another $20 billion from private sector players in the U.S., which means that the U.S. gave Argentina $40 billion, which will make sense why the president of Argentina did not attend the G20 summit. But even though he did not attend the G20 summit, he sent the foreign minister to South Africa. And under G20 rules, if the president is not attending, a cabinet level member or a special envoy from the president attending will suffice as the president attending. So, in other words, Argentina attended the G20 summit. Good. Why is this important? If Argentina attended, Argentina not being in agreement with the rest of the world will mean that there is no consensus. But Argentina said it did not agree with the rest of the world on how the declaration framed the conflict in Gaza. It wasn't accepting of the events that led to the conflict in Gaza. That is what Argentina said. And so they were not going to be accepting the declaration, which means that there won't be consensus, right? Well, when the president of South Africa announced the declaration, he announced that there was consensus for the declaration. Why is that? That is because even though the foreign minister of Argentina went to the press and on the floor of the summit to voice out his disagreement with portions of the declaration, they did not make an official objection to the declaration. So this is what I think. Argentina wanted to look good in the face of President Trump because he gave them $40 billion. So the president of Argentina did not attend. The foreign minister attended and then started to throw his weight around. But they did not make any official, objection to the declaration. So Argentina played both sides. They gave the G20 the consensus while also playing the media for President Trump. Win-win for Argentina, if you ask me. So the consensus happened and the declaration was made, which is a good thing for President Ramaphosa because that is what he wanted, but also important for the world because U.S. President was one of the people or the main person that made the presidency of South Africa of the G20 a living hell. When I say the main person, there were a lot of global conflicts before Ramaphosa took over. I say Ramaphosa or South Africa for a reason. The presidency of the G20 is held by a country. So South Africa holds the presidency of the G20. But the chair of the G20 is held by the leader of the country that holds the presidency. So Ramaphosa is the G20 chair. South Africa is the G20 presidency. So when I say Ramaphosa or South Africa, I mean the same thing. I just wanted to clear that out. It's a issue of, protocol. So he got what he wanted. But there's something that got my attention. The leaders of South Africa, including their foreign minister and everything, kept saying that Ramaphosa was not going to hand over to the U.S. president unless the U.S. has the president, a cabinet level minister, or a special envoy at Johannesburg for the summit. And I noticed that South Africa kept emphasizing special envoy. Why is that? So, in order for the U.S. to have a presence at the summit, the U.S. president, if he's not able to attend, will have to send a special envoy. So, the low-level U.S. embassy member, worker in Pretoria who was going to attend the summit anyway, all President Trump had to do was announce to the world that this person who is coming already is my special envoy. It's just a matter of protocol. All President Trump had to do was announce it, that this person is my special envoy. And then Ramaphosa will officially hand over the gavel to the US. But even though South Africa kept emphasizing that special envoy, either the US president missed the memo or didn't care. President Trump acted like me when my crush is giving me green light and I'm oblivious to it. It's happened to me many times in my life. So I guess the US missed the green light South Africa was giving them. South Africa was just saying that if Trump is not attending and Marco Rubio is not attending, just announce to the world that you have a special envoy attending. Simple. And then you get what you want. I guess the US missed the signal. But I love that South Africa maintained their stance, maintained their confidence, while also playing by the rules, which made it hard for the US to bully South Africa and hard for the allies of the US to find some loophole to deter or destroy the presidency of South Africa. Because it would have been bad look for South Africa if the first G20 summit happening in Africa went without a declaration. Because a declaration means that all the leaders in the world agree on your agenda. And South Africa's agenda is beautiful. There were issue of sustainability and solidarity, even issue of violence against women being declared as a national emergency, something that is good for the world, right? So this is one of those issues in the world where symbolism and substance collided in a way that feels like a world shift happened, or the globe shifted on its aisles. You know the globe? Love the globe. I always like Africa show. So yeah, good. This is always here to remind me what it's about. This is about the world, even though I'm an African who lives in the US, this is about the world. And the declaration had things that were good for the world. Number one, South African president wanted to make it clear that the next phase of global trade should emphasize the global south. So the global south should be a major player in the next level or the next phase of global trade. And so South Africa in their declaration, or the world in the declaration, said that IMF needs to have a 25th executive board member, with Africa having that board membership. I will make a whole video on what that means in future, maybe tomorrow, Monday. And then in the declaration, the G20 adopted the Finance Track Africa Engagement Framework, which means that the rest of the world will engage with Africa as a global partner, which is something Africa have been calling for a long time. Now there's a declaration to that effect. And fun fact, the declaration had the word Africa mentioned 52 times. And according to news report by SABC, South African President Ramaphosa was counting the number of mentions of Africa in the declaration on his iPad during the summit. And there was the issue of the critical mineral framework, which is very, very important. Critical mineral is important because of the fact that now the world is moving towards a more green energy framework, which requires better battery, and critical minerals have become important in issue of making batteries, with the issue of electric cars and more mobile phones being made and used in the world, more laptops, and my MacBook as an example being used in the world needs critical minerals, right? And Africa has a lot of critical minerals. What this framework is saying that in future, trade related to critical minerals in Africa won't be about Africa mining and sending raw materials to the rest of the world. A lot of the critical minerals will be refined and used within Africa before exported. You understand that? That was a beautiful part of the declaration. There was the Ubuntu approach to global food systems. So, there's global hunger. World hunger is something that unfortunately will probably always be with us. But the way we deal with world hunger and reduce world hunger, is has to change. And what is a framework or declaration is saying that let's approach world hunger from the way Africa does it. Africa is one of the biggest exporters of agricultural products. We need to be involved in the conversation around dealing with world hunger. And AI was also a very important thing that came up in the declaration. Data governance and AI was the name of that part of the framework. And it was about the fact that Africa need to have some agency in its approach to AI and data governance, issues of privacy and all those things. African governments need to start developing their own data centers and all that. That was also a very important part of the declaration. The declaration had 122 paragraphs. I read through them quickly this morning. And those were the 5 frameworks I picked up that stood out to me because I believe that those are the frameworks that matter to us, those of us who are not world leaders, who are just, of this is just a joke, victims of world leaders. We are not victims. We are, they are people who are represented by world leaders. We are the people represented by the world leaders. These are 5 things that I believe are relevant to us. And so I just wanted to highlight them and highlight the fact that South Africa made Africa proud. As an African, I'm so proud of how South Africa handled the G20 Leaders Summit. Not just how it handled it, how it handled the distractions that the US was trying to bring. That is beautiful. At the end of this year, I'm going to have my top 10 biggest geopolitical events that has to do with Africa. And of course, I'm telling you in advance, this won't be a shocker. Number one is going to be how Ramaphosa handled his presidency of the G20. So thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you are interested in more conversation around geopolitics from the perspective of an African. And even though the G20 summit is over, now that I have made friends with all of you in South Africa, I'm going to focus more on paying attention to what is happening in South Africa and report on it more and more. Usually I focus more on what is happening in Ghana in relation to geopolitics because that's where I'm from. But I'll pay attention to South Africa and more African countries as time goes on. It's just me, my iPhone, and my MacBook that does this. I hope to hire a team next year so that we can focus on doing more stories about the rest of Africa. All the 52 countries in Africa are doing great things in their own ways, and I plan to highlight all of them moving forward. Thank you for watching.